Hello once again, and thank you for joining me on the Waters and Stanton video channel. I'm going to talk about a range of antennas that have been around for many years. In fact, I would venture to say that the range of vertical antennas that this company makes, probably the most popular if we track it over the period of the last 40 years or so. The antenna range is the Hustler vertical antennas, which we've been stocking for many years, and I think I first came across them in the early 70s, so it means to say the range is what, 40 plus years old, and it hasn't actually changed much. There are three antennas in this range. There's the 4BTV, which covers 40, 20, 15 and 10 metres. There's the 5BTV, which adds 80 metres, and there's the 6BTV, which adds one of the walk bands, the 10 megahertz or 30 metre walk band. When the antennas were first introduced, of course, the walk bands didn't even exist. So understandably, the 4 and the 5BTV antennas are the longest, the oldest in the range, and the 6BTV is a more recent addition. Now, there are ways of actually adding walk bands to these antennas, but I will come to that in another video. For the moment, I'm going to take a look at probably the most popular antenna in the range, which is the 4BTV. Now, the reason it's popular is because it covers four of the popular bands, 40, 20, 15 and 10. I know that 15 and 10 haven't been active in the last few years, but now we're climbing up the sunspot cycle, we can expect those bands to open. So an antenna that covers 40, 20, 15 and 10 is quite an attractive investment. And it so happens, I was on the phone yesterday to the warehouse, and it so happens they've had a new delivery, a new shipment of these antennas. So if you are interested in the Hustler verticals, then go on their website or give them a ring, whatever, and they'll be happy to supply you with one. But you probably want to know a bit more about it before you buy it. So this really is the purpose of this video, to talk about and describe the 4BTV. Now, I've used a 4BTV for many years. In fact, I'm on my second one now. I lost the last one in a move when it got damaged when it was being packed away. But apart from damage when it was being packed away, it survived some pretty windy weather, and the one I've got at the moment in the garden has survived the recent storms that we had over the last few days. Survived it quite well. In fact, I did actually take it down when it really got windy, and I'll show you a video of that as well. And I think you'll be quite impressed how easy it is to take this antenna down if you're worried about the windy weather. And this really is one of its strengths. It's strong, it survives windy weather, it's self-supporting, which I think is quite important. Particularly if you've got a small garden, you want a vertical that's self-supporting. You don't want to have guys or anything like that. And you want something that is reliable. I know it's reliable because I've had one for many years. And apart from the fact that it starts to degrade on the surface, because any aluminium will start to degrade, it still works okay. And if you take normal precautions when you put it all together, it'll last for many years. Now, the range of verticals that Hustler make are trapped antennas. That's the way they make them multiband. Traps. Well, traps have been around for an awful long time. There's many trapped antennas that are in use by ham radio operators around the world. And I think it's fair to say that any losses in traps are absolutely minimal. You really don't have to worry about the efficiency of the antenna if it's got traps. But there is a little bit of a penalty with traps, because as soon as you put traps into an antenna, you start to make it narrow-banded, or more narrow-banded than it would be otherwise. But it's not too much of a problem. If we let's take a trap Yagi for example, 10, 15 and 20 metre trap Yagi. On 10 metres it's going to be full size anyway, because there is no trap in series with it. It's a 10 metre Yagi. When we get to 15 metres, the antenna is slightly shorter than it would normally be because the 10 metre trap loads it. And then when we get to 20 metres, it's even shorter than it would normally be because there's two traps in the circuit, the 10 metre and the 15 metre trap. The effect is really just to narrow the bandwidth a bit, but it's not really a serious penalty. If you adjust the antenna for the point in the band where you think you're going to operate mostly, then you'll find that the SWR will rise at the band edges. Probably it'll still be below 2 to 1 at the band edges. And any SWR below 2 to 1 is really acceptable. The loss is minimal. And the only thing you need to take into account, of course, is that a lot of modern transceivers are not happy when the VSWR starts to rise even above 1.5. The good news is that most of the modern transceivers have got antenna tuners built in, and therefore it takes up the slack, so it's not really a problem at all. Now, vertical antennas are a very popular choice for small gardens because it takes up very little space. The only thing you need to consider with a vertical antenna, of course, is the fact that you need some ground for it to work against, because a vertical antenna is really half of a dipole. The other half of the dipole is, in simple terms, is taken up by the earth plane. Now, that is rather important. The ground below the vertical and the ground extending several wavelengths from the vertical is quite important. There's not too much you can do about the ground that extends several wavelengths away from the vertical if you've got a small garden, because you're talking about next door's garden, or next door's house, or next door's shed, or trees, or whatever. You can't do much about it, so you are sort of lumbered with that, and you have to accept that. But you still need to provide some sort of earth system or counterpoise system. The popular way is to put radials on the ground, wire radials on the ground. Those wire radials won't be resonant because they're sitting on the ground, and the rule of thumb is the more wire, the better. Well, there are limitations in even a small garden. You know, you've got the grass to worry about, the flower beds, etc., etc. So really and truly, you need to make the best of what you can. The more wire you put out, the better. It doesn't have to be a set length. It's a question of the more wire, the better. But even if you can't put out a lot of wire, the antenna will still work. 2 or 3 copper rods banged into the ground is a good start. Certainly I would advise some sort of wire radials extending from those copper pipes. And you can consider radials above the ground. The only problem with putting radials above the ground is that they have to be resonant. They do provide better performance, but they do have to be resonant. So I think radials is going to be covered in a separate video. There's quite a lot to talk about radials. You do need some sort of ground, but don't get too hung up about the ground system. Make do with what you've got, and that's always been my philosophy in ham radio. Make do with what you've got. Make the best use of what you've got. You know, the grass is always greener in the next field, but I think with the windy weather we've had recently, some of us that have got simple antenna systems feel rather smug, not having to worry about towers that might come down and 3 or 4 element Yagis waving about in the wind, etc., etc., and rotators that have got jammed. So there is some sort of comfort factor in having a simple aerial system. Anyway, let's have a look at the 4BTV, which is an antenna I know very well. The Hustler 4BTV is a slim but rugged antenna. It's self-supporting, which is a great attraction. For the larger 80 metre version they do recommend guide, but for the 40 through to 10 metres it's self-supporting, and it stands just over 20 feet high, which is around about 7 metres. Here's a line drawing of the antenna, so let's see how it operates. The base is fitted with U-clamps which will accommodate mast section of approximately 1.5 inches. If we travel up from the base, the first trap we come to is a 28 MHz trap. which isolates the lower part of the antenna, and that antenna section is resonant on the 10-metre handband. Now, if we move up the antenna, we come to another trap, which is the 21 MHz or 15-metre trap. That makes the antenna resonant on 15 metres because the energy will travel through the 10-metre trap but be blocked off by the 15-metre trap. But the 10-metre trap does provide a little bit of load in, so the antenna is physically slightly shorter than it would normally be on the 15-metre band. Now we move up a bit further and we come to a trap which is tuned to 14 MHz or the 20-metre band, and the process is repeated. The two lower traps are quite happy to pass 20-metre energy, but when it hits the 20-metre trap it's blocked off. So we've now got an antenna which is resonant on the 20-metre band, and those two traps provide a bit of load in. So again, the antenna is slightly shorter on 20 metres than it would be if it was a full-size quarter wave. Now, if we move up further, we've got no more traps, but we've got this spiky thing, which is actually a capacity hat. And the section above that 20-metre coil brings the antenna to resonance on the 40-metre band. And that capacity hat means to say that the antenna is physically slightly shorter than it would be without the capacity hat. So the capacity hat has the means of lowering the frequency without actually extending the vertical height of the antenna anymore. So it makes the antenna fairly compact. And it benefits from the loading of those three coils. So instead of the antenna physically being around about 32 or 33 foot tall, it's only around about 21 foot tall, which makes it nice and compact and very attractive for the smaller garden. The antenna is well packed in a box less than 2 metres long, so very easy to transport, and it comes with very detailed instructions, diagrams and description of how to put it together. It's a very straightforward antenna, nicely presented and certainly very easy to put together. I found no problems whatsoever. Mounting the antenna is quite simple. I purchased this unit from Amazon. It cost me £22 and it enables me to bore a hole in the ground without a lot of digging, and that saves a lot of time. And I just bored a hole in the ground and then put a short stub mast into the ground, poured some fence post concrete in, let it set, and then I was ready to mount the antenna. The individual sections are connected with hose clamps, and I'll take you through that now. These hose clamps that Hustler provides are typical that you find in DIY stores, but I find using a box spanner is so much easier than trying to put a screwdriver in there. It can slip. Box spanner is so much more positive, you can get a good purchase on it. The only problem is that these that Hustler provide, and perhaps they're available in America, have got a slightly larger bolt head than the ones that you get in the UK, so you need a couple of box spanners. But anyway, my advice is to get yourself a box spanner. It's a good investment and you can use it for all sorts of things as well. And one thing you need to do before winter comes in is to weatherproof these joints. I tend to use electrical tape initially so that at least I've sealed the joint and the water can't get in. Long term I would tend to use self-amalgamating tape. The reason I use electrical tape is that it's easy to get off if I want to make some final adjustments. The other thing I would recommend is you put tape right around here as well, because you can get water in those slits there. The problem with water and sort of general weather is that long term you get sort of surface corrosion on the tube, and when you want to pull it apart you can't. So it's worth putting tape around there to stop the ingress of water, because believe me, if 2 or 3 years time you want to take it apart, you suddenly find that it's very difficult, or in the worst case scenario you can't just get it apart. So that's my weather tip for that. I think it's possibly a unique feature of trapped antenna that the Hustler traps are tunable. If you loosen this point here, this hose clamp here, you can move this trap housing up or down. Now, before you do anything, you must make a mark. First of all, where the trap is, as it came from the factory, and then secondly, another mark where you want to move it to. If you move the trap slightly higher, it lowers the frequency. If you move the trap slightly lower, it raises the frequency. And I use the word slightly advisedly because we're talking about a 1/16 or an 1/8 of an inch. And once you've moved it, you have to move this weather housing just down to make sure it sits properly on the housing. As I say, you only need to move it about an 1/8 of an inch or even a 1/16. The only trap I had to change was the 20-metre one, and I think the resonant point was just a tad too high for me. But I moved the trap and it was perfect. So one of the features of the Hustler antenna is that it's so easy to tune the trap. So a plus there for Hustler. The connection to the base of the antenna is via a pair of terminals, and they provide the necessary tags for that. Here's another tip. When you're making the adjustments, rather than keep undoing these U-bolts here, keep the base in place and simply remove the antenna from this basic stub section here, which is at the base. Just put a bit of lubricant on there or something like that. But you can remove the antenna very easily and put it back in place. For testing, it doesn't make a scrap of difference because there's enough electrical connection there to make good connection. Ultimately, you're going to put a hose clamp on the antenna, but when you're up and down, don't keep taking these things off. It's not necessary. Just lift the antenna off of this stub section here. Once you've done all the adjustments, of course, then it's time to erect the antenna, and you can see it's a very slim design, fits into the average garden quite nicely. Earlier in this video I showed you how I left the bottom section of the antenna clamped so that I could remove the majority of the antenna quite easily. Let me show you now how easy it was for me to put my antenna up. And there's not many antennas, there's not many vertical antennas you can put back up as quickly as this. Just watch this. So let's have a look at the VSWRs now. This is on 40 metres. By the way, these readings are at the end of 40 metres of RG213. Next come up is 20 metres, 14 megahertz. I couldn't do a reading close to the antenna because I've got a single unbroken length of coax coming up the garden. Where are we? 21 megahertz again, quite respectable. And yes, I didn't want to break the coax because it goes underground and it just was not really possible. And then finally we've got 28 megahertz again, good readings. So they're respectable readings and good bandwidth. We had some good weather in the last day or so, so I took the opportunity of taking the antenna down again just to have a quick look at it, because it does need to be sort of given a once over, because it's been up for about 2 years now, I suppose. And it gave me the opportunity of showing you how the 80 metre version works, because the 80 metre model, the 5B TV, adds 80 metres simply by adding one of their mobile whips. They add their high power mobile whips. And by the way, I should have mentioned this antenna will easily handle a kilowatt of power. So if you have got a linear, you'll have no problem, but it'll handle that power as well. So let me show you how the 80 metre whip goes onto the end of the antenna to make it a 5-band antenna. Now, I didn't have an 80 metre whip, so I've used one of their 40 metre whips, and clearly that wouldn't work, but it shows the mechanical principle of how you add the antenna to it, the whip to it. And you can see on the end here you've got the thread. It's a 3/8 inch thread, and you just screw the whip on like that, and then you have your 80 metre version. So if you've got a 4B TV and you want to upgrade to a 5B TV, you just order the high power 80 metre whip and you're there. If on the other hand you want to order the 5BT from scratch, then of course you get that whip included in the package. It's all very simple. Now the antenna works well. I've used this antenna, as I said, for a long time, so I know exactly how well it works. Is it a DX antenna? Somebody said to me very recently. Well, you know, there isn't such a thing as a DX antenna as such. Antennas are designed, and then it depends how you install them. So when somebody says, oh, I've designed a DX antenna, well, it's only a DX antenna if you install it correctly. Now, let me give you an example. If you have a 3-element Yagi and you put it on the end of a 7-metre pole or 6-metre pole, 18 foot above the ground, it's not going to work much DX because it's just too low. The angle of radiation will be high and it's not function as a DX antenna, not the way that you would hope it would. You've got to put it up to around about 10 or 15 metres above the ground before you start to get some decent low angle radiation. Now, the same applies to vertical antennas actually, because we're told that a vertical antenna has low angle radiation, and it does. It does have low angle radiation. The problem is, in a small garden location, a significant amount of that low angle radiation is absorbed by adjacent buildings, your house, your neighbour's house next door, telegraph poles, all the house wiring, trees, shrubs and anything else that gets in the way. It all has an effect. And also, the way that a vertical works is very much dependent on several wavelengths of ground going away from it. I covered that in a video about a month or so ago, that it's not only your ground that's important, it's your neighbour's ground that's important. Of course, you've got no control over your neighbour's ground or the neighbour beyond that. We're looking at about 4 or 5 wavelengths away from the antenna. All that ground dictates how well the antenna performs. So, is a 4 or 5 or 6 BTV vertical a DX antenna? It is, if it's given the chance. If you put the antenna into the middle of a field, it's going to be very similar to antenna modelling. But if you put it in a small garden like most of us have got, or many of us have got, then it's not going to work quite as modelling would suggest. That low angle radiation is there, but it doesn't go very far. And as I said before, it also depends on the surrounding terrain, how well it works. I mean, a good example, and I covered this again in another video a couple of months ago, a good example is how well an antenna will work when it's near salt water. And I showed you a clip of a video of a G station who was in Spain, or had a holiday home in Spain, and he was working VKs and ZLs, pedestrian mobile. I couldn't even hear the stations, and he was quite clearly getting several S points gain by being by this salt water area that he had a holiday home in. Very, very interesting actually. I'll try and put a link underneath this video so you can see it for yourself. But there we are. Now, 4BT, 5BT, 6BTV, they're great antennas, and I've only today had a memo from somebody who's got one, said, yeah, you're right, Peter, even if you've got a poor earth, it will still work. Even if you can only put out a few wire radials, even if you can only put copper pipe into the ground, it still works. It doesn't work as well as what it would do in a perfect area, but wouldn't we all like perfect areas? You know, sometimes the grass seems to be greener in the next field. We see pictures, don't we, of these hams that have got big towers, but acres of ground. Great. And then along comes the storms. And then we who have just got fairly simple antennas feel a little bit smug, don't we? We feel a little bit cosy, smug. It's blowing a gale outside, and the worst that can happen is my wire will fall down and I have to put it up again. I don't have to worry about a tower bending over in the wind and how much that Yagi cost me, and is the insurance company going to pay for it? No, I don't have those problems at all. Ham radio is a challenge. You make the best of what you've got. So there we are. That's the story of the Hustler antennas. Great antennas. I think I said at the beginning of the video. If I didn't, I'll say it again now. We do have those in stock. We just had a new shipment in, which is very coincidental. I didn't time this video because of that, but I had a phone call yesterday saying that we've got them in stock again. So we've got the full range in stock. If you want one of those, check our website, pick up the phone or order one on the internet, and we'll be happy to supply and of course support you, because one of the things we do is we support our customers, which I think is very important. Okay, well, another video. Thank you for watching this video. Take care, keep safe. Hope that the gales in the UK, because it was in the UK we had the gales, hope the gales haven't damaged your antennas too much. Until the next time, take care, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.